It was Saturday, and we had guests. Jenny and her husband Trev have been our friends since we moved to Houston. We went with them to dinner, to neighborhood parties, and to each other's houses after a movie or a walk. They were the same age as us, late 30s. We were all college graduates, dealing with student debt, building careers, and experiencing the occasional separation due to travel for both Trev and my wife, Debbie. Deb was getting ready to go on another business trip, and Trev had just left our house and left for the airport on the West Coast, which was his territory. This was our way of life. They traveled, and we kept the fire going at home. Jenny and I worked as an accountant and an architect, respectively. Our business trips were minimal, if not rare. In most cases, when one spouse was away, the other would visit the remaining couple for dinner or weekend barbecues. After Trev said goodbye and left for the airport, I left the girls chatting in the kitchen and went to the garage. I cleaned up my desk and checked our security system, which we had spent a lot of money on after the recent thefts in our community. Each room had microphones and cameras connected to a server in the attic. Everything that was recorded was saved in the cloud if the devices were activated by motion sensors. I could check any room using an app on my phone or any computer I could log on to. Out of habit, I decided to check if everything was working. "How was your last trip?" I heard Jenny ask my wife Debbie as she sat at the kitchen table. As usual, Debbie grinned. Work, dinner, bar, and then, eventually, some sleep. "Is it true what they say about people who cheat while on business trips, Debbie?" Jenny said, clearly worried about her husband. My wife paused before answering. Pregnant pause for a second. "I wouldn't worry too much, Jen," my wife replied, taking a sip from her glass. "Trev always comes back to you, doesn't he?" "Yes, but I don't know what he does when he's alone, if he really is alone." "Jen," her wife reassured her, "he'll come back to you. Do not pay attention to what happens when he is not at home." "What do you mean, Deb?" "Exactly what I said," my wife replied. "What happens when people are away doesn't mean anything." I stood there in shock as my wife's words echoed in my head. What happens when people are away doesn't mean anything. What happens when people are away doesn't mean anything. Does what happens when people are away mean nothing? Did she really say that? I asked myself. "Debbie, what do you mean?" Jenny asked my wife. But by that time, Debbie had become silent and more reserved. "Nothing, Jen," she said cautiously. "You're just worried about the little things. Trev loves you to death. He comes back to you and loves you. His trips are just business. Nothing superfluous." I realized that Jenny was not reassured by Debbie's remark, but she politely allowed my wife to change the subject. I let them talk for a while longer before returning to the kitchen and getting myself a cup of coffee. After what I heard, I wanted my thoughts to be clear. After another 40 minutes of small talk, Jenny left for home and we sat down to rest. I was polite to my wife, but careful. To say that her words made me wary would be an understatement. When she went upstairs to take a shower, a lot of thoughts were running through my head. Is she cheating on me when she leaves? Have you done this many times? Once? Recently? Weeks or months ago? But the way she said it spoke volumes. Her comment was not the product of deliberate reflection. In fact, there was no indignation or disapproval in her tone. Just a fact. Statement without judgment. What should I do? What does any man do? Should I ask her directly? Should I leave my 4-year marriage? We were thinking about having children. Did she sleep with someone while she was away? How can I be sure that the child will be mine? Then I quickly figured it out. She usually traveled to Phoenix, San Diego, Seattle, and Omaha. Did she have lovers in each of these places? Or was there a lover she met in one of them? Did he look better? Was it larger in size? Thicker? Longer? None of these thoughts made me excited. Instead, I felt frustrated, anxious, and sad. The woman I loved cheated on me. As much as I wanted to be wrong, the logical part of my mind said otherwise. My wife Debbie, in a fit of honesty, revealed her infidelity. I didn't go to bed with her that night. She came downstairs to pick me up, but I pretended to fall asleep on the sofa, burying my face in the pillows. She tried to wake me up, but I pretended to be sound asleep, and she finally gave up. Not wanting to turn around and look at her, I remained in this position until I finally fell into a restless sleep until the morning. The first thing I noticed when I started to wake up was the smell of coffee and the sound of her footsteps in flip-flops in the kitchen. I opened one eye and saw a cup of coffee a few inches away from me on the table. Still confused, I didn't say anything or move, but I realized that I was only delaying the inevitable. When I opened my eyes, Debbie was standing next to the sofa in slippers and a robe. Her blonde hair fell over her right shoulder, and she looked at me thoughtfully. I looked at her and stood up without touching the coffee. She gave me a worried look as I walked past without saying a word. After locking the bathroom door, I completed my morning chores and began brushing my teeth. Creaks from outside the door told me that she was standing right outside the door, but the sounds soon died down. We didn't say a word to each other all morning, and I was glad because I wasn't ready to talk to her yet. I wasn't afraid of her. On the contrary, I was looking forward to it, but I needed to know everything for sure first. I needed proof. It's in my nature. I never take any action without knowing all the facts. Taking my laptop, I sat down in our office in the corner of the living room. It was a desk that was angled into the room so I could work without having to show my wife the screen. Debbie walked past me several times from the bedroom to the kitchen, but stayed away from me. Her silence angered me even more. Why didn't she ask what was wrong with me? Maybe it was part of her game. Having calmed down, I focused on finding private detectives in the cities where she traveled. After filling out a few forms and writing a description of what I needed, I used my personal credit card to hire 4 detective agencies to follow my wife on her next trip. "Aren't you hungry?" she finally asked around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I was hungry, but I didn't want to eat with her. "No," I answered and pretended to be busy. She looked at me from the kitchen, trying to understand what was happening to me, but I did not want to look back. Her silence was condemning me. Any wife who has nothing to hide would have long ago figured out why her husband pulled away from her. Any wife who has nothing to worry about. "Maybe we can go somewhere," I suddenly said and stood up, taking my wallet, phone, and car keys. She looked surprised for a few seconds, then nodded and reached for her purse. She already had the phone in her hand, the same phone that she always kept with her. Debbie never let him out of her sight, and it was password protected. As we headed towards the door, I let her pass first and looked at her beautiful young figure, a figure that, until last night, I thought belonged to me as much as my body belonged to her. We always took my car when we went out together, so she walked over to the passenger seat, waiting for me to open the door, like always. Given recent events, this was the last thing I wanted to do, but I forced myself. Everything that happens before she leaves for her trip on Tuesday must be done carefully. I thought I might have already ruined everything. "Sorry about today," I said. "It seems that I made a mistake while working on the project, and I will have to get out and correct it when I come on Monday." "About," she said with relief, then caught herself and made a worried face. "Johnson's project." She asked about the house I finished 3 weeks ago. So that's how she listened attentively to our conversations. "No," I answered. "Something about a future project. I'll make new drawings and correct my mistakes this week. Everything will be all right. I just hate making mistakes." "You're too hard on yourself," she replied, now relaxed because I had given her the explanation she wanted to hear. "Everyone makes mistakes." I almost said, "That's for sure," but refrained. "Italian cuisine or Chinese?" I asked. We talked about all sorts of things, what unmarried people discuss, and a little about bills. In my thoughts, I was wondering what to do about where to sleep again. I knew the trick of falling asleep on the couch wouldn't work anymore. When we got home, I took a shower and went to bed with my tablet to read. But I think I was looking at the same page for the entire 30 minutes that Debbie showered and left the bathroom. She put her robe back on. This is what she did when she was naked underneath him and had sex on her mind. She liked to take off her robe in front of me before we made love, or, as I thought, just sex. I wondered when was the last time we actually made love. When was the last time she loved me? She lay down next to me, still in her robe, but I continued reading or pretended to read. Placing her hand on my thigh, she moved closer to me. "Are you angry with me?" she finally said. I didn't answer, but turned to study her face. I wanted to see if she would give away anything with her gaze. "I found your pills in the bathroom. You started taking them again." She froze at my statement. "Yes, I know," she answered. "Sorry, I thought we'd wait a few more months." I nodded, not wanting to make a scene. "No problem," I replied. "You're angry," she replied, but it was not with concern, but with irritation or dissatisfaction. "No," I answered. "I don't want a baby right now either." I kept silent, but thought, "With you." She was silent for a few seconds, then removed her hand when I remained motionless. After a few minutes, she turned away from me and turned off the light on her side. I heard her breathing and eventually a quiet cry. It was more than I could bear. I got up, took the tablet with me, and left the room. "Carson." I heard her, but closed the door and returned to the sofa. The next morning she was dressed when I woke up. It was 6 in the morning time for our. That is, for my morning run, she was already dressed for work. "I have coffee ready," she said and seemed about to say something else, but stopped. I think by this time she already realized that I was angry with her. "When did you find out about the pills?" she asked. I wanted to say that I found out yesterday, but I didn't want her to think that it happened recently. "Last week," I lied, no longer caring that I was lying to her. "And you didn't say anything." "You didn't bother to ask what I thought, Debbie," I replied, "so there's nothing to say." "I'd No problem, Deb," I replied. "If you don't want a child with me, then I don't want it either." She wanted to say something, but I walked past her. "I'm late," I said, and went to change into a running suit. I needed a run. I needed some alone time to clear my head. Running has always helped me focus and pull myself together. It started in high school when I ran track on the school team, then in the Army and in college. Running has always helped me deal with lack of concentration and insecurities as a youth and then as an adult. Now I was married and starting the possibility of divorce in the face. That night she returned home and cooked dinner. Out of politeness, I sat at the table with her and ate. I barely finished my plate, but I still tried to be polite. "Can we talk about children when I return from my trip?" she asked. "As you say," I answered. But only her words to Jenny were spinning in my head. What happens when people are away doesn't mean anything. The next morning, she waited for me to wake up. She was already dressed for the trip. Her bag stood by the door along with her coat. "Are you going to be okay while I'm gone?" she asked. "I'll survive," I answered, as always. "Carson," she said, "I love you." I nodded politely and said, "Me too." She saw the pain on my face, and I saw her wince. I think I heard her sob as she ran out the door, leaving me staring at her, hearing her car start and drive away. That day, I went to see a divorce lawyer. Since we had no children, we only had to divide the property accumulated over the years of marriage. But in the division of property, adultery is also taken into account. We didn't have a signed prenuptial agreement, which I now realized was a mistake. But if the private investigators find something compelling, then maybe I'll end up with more property. But lawyers will fight for this in court and drag out the process to receive additional fees. What a mess. Jenny left me a few messages, but I wasn't ready to talk to her yet. Maybe I'll visit her later. But she beat me to it and came to my work. She took a taxi and waited outside my car. "Why don't you answer my calls and messages?" she asked. "I have a lot on my mind," I replied. "Take me to dinner and home," she said. "We need to talk." I did this and we talked. What happens when people are away doesn't mean anything. When I reminded her of my wife's comment, Jenny nodded and looked at me directly. "Where is your wife tonight?" she asked. "In San Diego," I answered. Or at least that's what she said. "Did you call her work?" asked. "No," I replied, feeling stupid for not doing it. "Maybe you should," she said, "because I called." I looked at her for a long time. The following Friday, Debbie returned from her trip. First, she went to work and then home. By that time, I had dinner ready and the table was set. "Oh my God, dear," she exclaimed. "You tried so hard." She ran up to me to kiss me. It was not a kiss with a tongue, but the kind that husband and wife usually give to each other, even in public. I let her kiss me, and since it was a short kiss, there was no awkward moment. At that moment, I wondered if this would be our last kiss. "Trev and Jen are on their way to dinner," I said, checking the stuffed peppers in the oven. "Trev and Jen?" she said in surprise. "Are they coming towards us? Tonight?" I immediately realized that she did not support my choice of guests the first night after her return. But I didn't ask her. I understood her situation perfectly. "I thought that you and I—" She fell silent when she saw that I turned and smiled at her with an encouraging smile. "I think I'll get changed." I watched her go into the bedroom to take off her business suit. She had her last meeting in Omaha that morning, then flew home and stopped at the office before arriving home. It's clear that she planned on a shower, dinner, and some time to relax. After all, she's had quite a long and stressful week, hasn't she? I checked my phone one last time for messages. There was one thing, from Jenny. "Jenny, we're on our way." It was sent 5 minutes ago. At that moment, the shower upstairs turned off. If all goes well, Deb will be dressed soon, just in time for our guests. "They're on their way," I shouted to her, but received no answer. I had an idea why. Seeing them was the last thing she wanted. She came downstairs in jeans and a white t-shirt. I saw the pink straps of her bra underneath. She wore flip-flops, as did we both when we were relaxing at home. Smiling at me nervously, she came closer, placing her hand on my shoulder. "Can I help?" she asked. "The wine is in the refrigerator," I answered, checking the stuffed peppers again. "They will be ready in 15 minutes maximum." "It smells delicious," she said. "What's in the pan?" "Orzo pasta," I answered. A sad expression appeared on her face as she nodded, appreciating my choice for dinner. This was the dish I made for her for our last anniversary after we discovered Greek cuisine on a trip to Europe. Remembering those days on our honeymoon, I felt sad, but this evening had to be spent, and this was part of it. The table was set for 4, 2 seats on each side, not the usual one opposite the other. She glanced at him briefly and then took a bottle of Zinfandel out of the refrigerator to open and let him breathe. "Can I ask?" she managed to say before the doorbell rang. "I'll open it," I said, leaving her in the kitchen. I whispered to myself, "It's time." I opened the door and our friends were standing next to each other. Trev looked a little worried and nervous, but Jen smiled at me knowingly and then kissed me right on the lips in front of him. "Hello, handsome," she said, pulling away and walking past me. I immediately realized that Trev, her husband, was not happy with our public display of affection. "Hi, Trev," I said with a smile. No, I didn't grin. "Come in." "Carson," he answered, entering the house. Jen and Debbie were already chatting in the kitchen when we entered. For the first time in a long time, I noticed Trevor, who was looking around the room. His eyes darted from Jen to Deb and back to me. He looked like a man trying to understand what was going on. "We're having a European dinner today," I announced. "Jen is sitting with me, and Deb is with Trev." Trevor and my wife looked at each other quickly and then looked away as Jen giggled. "I think I like it. Evening in European style from food to seating. I wonder what else the Europeans are doing," she asked, raising an eyebrow. But Trev and Debbie said nothing in response and sat down next to each other. I could tell right away that they were tense, but Jen just kept talking to them, being her chatty, cheerful self. Inside, I wanted to laugh. "Europeans share a lot more than just seats at the table," I replied with a grin to Jen, who grinned back and then laughed. "They exchange spouses or live in open marriages." "Interesting," Jen said. "What do you think about this, Trev?" He tensed. "I wouldn't like it," he replied. My wife flinched for a moment, then looked away. "I don't know, Trev," Jen answered. "Maybe the Europeans have something." Again, my wife and Trev just looked at us and stole glances at each other. When I served our dinner, I offered everyone a glass of wine, not allowing the two across from us to refuse. I just filled their glasses. They'll need it soon. As we ate, Jen complimented the choice of dish and how it was prepared. Politely, Deb and Trevor agreed. You could tell they were trying to be polite, but they were both worried. "How was your trip, Trev?" I asked at dinner. Both my wife and he stopped eating at the same time. It would be comical if it weren't so sad. The pain of realization intensified with each passing minute. Only Jen's hand on my thigh calmed me down. It wasn't sexual touching, and soothing and caring. "Everything is the same," he said. "I meet with clients and our representatives in the region, then I go to the next city and repeat again." "And you, Deb?" Jenny asked. "Same as Trev," she replied. "We both essentially do the same work, but for different companies and clients." By this time, both were sorting through their food. Again, this would be funny if it weren't sad. I tried to ignore it and refilled their glasses. After we finished, or rather stopped, eating because my wife and Trev had lost their appetite, Jen and I collected the plates. Debbie offered to help, but I stopped her. "You and Trev just returned from a trip. Go sit in the living room. We'll be there soon." "Okay," she said with another worried look and a tight smile. Amid the tension, Trev tried to say something to his wife, but she went into the bathroom. I watched as they walked into the living room, exchanging questioning glances. They might have been whispering, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. But I could imagine it. They were worried. When Jen returned, we joined them. "So you guys aren't interested in an open European style of marriage?" I said with a grin. Jen joined me, laughing. Debbie and Trev just awkwardly giggled like it was a joke. "It's a pity," Jen added, winking at me. "They are all such modest people. How about I check out something I came across this week? I think you'll like it." "Is this a women's film?" Jen asked, feigning delight. "It has both masculine and feminine aspects," I replied, turning on the TV on the wall and going to the file that I had saved on the hard drive of the connected PC. The opening scene showed street views of the city with lots of sun and coastline. The camera then panned to show the naval base as the car drove north and stopped behind a taxi stopped in front of the hotel. Trev was a little slow to realize at first, but Debbie recognized the hotel just before the video showed first Trev and then her getting out of the taxi and entering the hotel hand in hand. By now, they had a look of shock on their faces. The camera followed them as they checked in and then walked to the elevator with their luggage and held hands. As the elevator door closed, they were seen leaning in to kiss. "Carson, you can stop," Trevor said, but Jen stopped him with a cold voice. "Shut up and watch," she said. Both. When I turned to look at my wife, she had a panicked and embarrassed look on her face. I saw her lips tremble as she tried to look away from the screen. The scene changed, and I moved to a hotel room. Yes, our stars were in the frame. Deb and Trev were both naked. When I turned to look at my now crying wife, I couldn't help myself. "I would have thought that you would cheat with someone bigger," I said. "Fuck you, Carson." Trev finally spoke. But he said no more as Jen slapped him in the face and glared at him. "And finally," I said, as if commenting on a nature show, "the cheating woman lies on the bed, spreads her legs, waiting for the cheating man to have sex with her." "That was good," Trev said in the video. "Does your husband give it to you as well?" "Sometimes," my wife answered in the video, changing her mood. "I told you not to mention Carson when we do this." "Why not? Do you feel guilty?" he answered, returning to the room. "I just don't want to talk about him." "You're killing the mood, Trev," she replied. They lay down on the bed, and the video fast-forwarded for almost an hour. They both dozed off. Deb woke up first and lay facing away from Trevor. Then he woke up and reached out to her. She didn't resist. Jen, who had watched the video earlier, looked at her husband with a cold gaze. He was angry, but resigned himself to seeing evidence of his betrayal to his wife. My wife stopped watching and sobbed quietly into her hands. After that, they fell asleep again. The video paused for a second and rewound to the next morning, when the two of them had sex again and then showered before going their separate ways. They were both in San Diego. At this point, the screen went dark and I stopped the video. Trevor glared at me while Jen stood up and sat next to me. "Well," she said, "it was quite educational, wasn't it?" Finally, Debbie looked at me. "How did you know?" That's all she asked. I turned the screen back on as I expected this move. The screen showed her and Jen talking in our kitchen last week. "Jen, is it true what they say about people who cheat on business trips, Debbie?" "Deb, I wouldn't worry too much, Jen. Trev always comes back to you, doesn't he?" "Jen, yeah, but I don't know what he does when he's alone, if he really is alone." "Deb, Jen, he's coming back to you. Ignore what happens when he's not home." "Jen, what do you mean, Deb?" "Deb, exactly what I said. What happens when people are away means nothing. What happens when people are away doesn't mean anything. What happens when people are away doesn't mean anything. What happens when people are away doesn't mean anything." I played the last line in the video 3 times for effect. "That's what gave you away, Deb," I said. "That's what made me think that you might be cheating on me. I didn't know with whom, but then I realized that you were cheating on me." "I already had suspicions," Jen interrupted. "The way you always managed to cross paths on trips. How you avoided each other during conversations." She stopped and turned to me. "It's funny how they were radiating guilt tonight and constantly checking on each other. You were both pathetic. I hired detectives in all 4 cities you went to," I told her. She winced, shaking her head. She sobbed again, realizing what would happen next. "They found other things," I added and pressed the remote to start the video again. The video showed Deb sitting at a bar with another man before they walked into a hotel room, patting each other's butts along the way. Inside the room, she put on a similar performance. "You bitch," Trevor shouted, turning to her. "Did you cheat on me?" Jen and I laughed at his outburst and the look of despair on my unfaithful wife's face. They looked at each other and then at us. "But wait," I counterfeited. "That's not all." The video continued to show Trevor in a room in Las Vegas with a slender and muscular black woman. "My husband doesn't do this to me," said the black woman. "I'm glad to help," Trevor replied, going into the bathroom. Unable to contain myself, I applauded this performance. Debbie simply shook her head at Trevor in disgust. "How sweet," Jen said. "Cheaters cheat on each other. Priceless." We were all silent after that, each in our own thoughts. Debbie spoke first. "Carson," she said, looking at me with trembling lips and voice, "what will happen to us now?" Then I turned to look at her seriously. "You know," I said to both of them, "Jen and I spent a few days coming to terms with all this and talking. We are both ready to make compromises. In reality, none of us are saints. If one of you offered to exchange partners, we would agree to it. To be honest, I was thinking about proposing to you myself, Deb. But you chose a different path, didn't you? You could just ask me openly and honestly so we can make this decision and walk this path together. Instead, you chose the selfish path of doing what you want and leaving me in the dark. You chose to lie and betray me. Us. You betrayed us, Debbie. How can I forgive this? How can I get over the fact that you chose to go behind my back and do as you please while you were away? How long would you last before you started doing this here?" "I bet they've already started," Jen said. "I was told at his work that your dear wife picked him up for extended lunches several times." Debbie turned away, and so did Trevor. "So what do you want?" Trevor finally asked. "Well," Jen said, "looks like we have all the evidence we need against you too. We don't have children, so we just need to divide the property. And since adultery can be used in court in Texas, you're both screwed. Literally. Give me your phone numbers, both of you," I said, and unlock them. Debbie winced, but handed over her phone unlocked. Trevor hesitated, but Jen walked over and simply snatched the phone from his hand. "It's unlocked," she said, handing it to me. "He tried to play the recording while we were talking, but he did not have time to do this since we were following him. Give me a minute. I'll check his cloud account. It took her a few minutes, during which I checked Debbie's phone. She didn't write anything down, but I looked in her gallery and found photos of Trev and another man. There were photos of men's intimates and a couple of videos. Cool, Deb, I told her, shaking my head when she turned away. So, this is how it will be. There's no way, Jen, that I'll ever trust you two again. Too many lies over time. Jen was talking on the phone at the time. Come on over, she said and turned to watch what was happening. You both work for companies that have moral clauses in their contracts. Have you forgotten about this? I saw almost panic on their faces. It seems so, I added. Both of your bosses and their legal departments will be very disappointed with your behavior. One of them is a womanizer himself, but his company has already paid compensation for one of his misdeeds, so now he allows his HR department and lawyers to deal with those who break the rules. And this is your boss, Trevor. Damn, he muttered. That's what let you down, asshole, Jen told him. I gave you everything you asked for in bed. I gave you all of myself and did not hide anything, except when I was sick. And even when I had the flu last year, I let you have sex with me. You stabbed me in the back, Trevor. We're done with you. Well, not quite yet. What do you mean? He asked. Well, I continued the story. Divorces are inevitable, and you both will sign documents giving us 70% of the assets. If you resist, videos of you performing will go to your families and friends as well as your employers. Carson, Debbie looked at me with a pleading look. Please don't. Can't we try to figure it out? Seriously, Deb, I grinned. If you saw a video of me having sex with Jen behind your back, would you try to figure it out? Please give me a chance. I gave you a chance, Deb, I replied. We had problems even before you left for your cheating tour, and you decided to do it anyway. You decided to start taking the pills again without talking to me, and don't tell me that this is your body and you're right. We are married. We chose to live together and make decisions together. You betrayed me and my trust long before you ever slept with him or anyone else. You lost respect for me, so it was easy for you to do this. I want to know only one thing. Why? She turned away and then looked up at me again. I didn't have much experience with men before you. One guy who finished in a minute, Carson. This was my entire experience before you. I wanted to try others and see how it was. I looked at her in disbelief. You should have thought about this before you married me, I replied. That's when people try other people. Not after they got married. Marriage is not just a commitment, it is a contract between two people. This means it's just the two of them against the world, and that this marriage is exclusive until and unless both parties agree otherwise. You know, the part about giving up all others. She wanted to say something, stopped, and then spoke. Carson, I wanted to have fun before marriage. But you showed up, and I didn't want to risk losing you. Everything was so good between us in the first few years, but last year it all came back to me. I began to wonder what other men were like. Not in love. I had you for this. Only sex. That's all I wanted. I shook my head in disappointment. All you had to do was ask me, Deb. All you had to do was talk to me. I don't think I would support your idea of sleeping with strangers in other cities, but here at home we could find people we could trust. To be honest, I'd even let you sleep with that idiot if we all decided to do it together, because we're all friends. Instead, you two went behind our backs and broke our trust. Debbie, with trust and love comes respect. You lost all respect for me to go behind my back. We could figure this out together, but you chose to do it alone without me. Jen nodded in agreement. That goes for you too, Trev, she said, especially after our conversation. Now it was my turn to look at her in surprise, while Trevor looked away and Debbie looked between Jen and Trevor in shock. Have you talked? She asked. What did he say? That bastard told me he would never share me with Carson and would leave if I brought it up again or he caught me. Can you believe this shit? Debbie shook her head at Trevor and then swung her hand and hit him. Jerk, she said as she attempted a second and third strike. When you suggested doing this, I said we should get them involved, didn't I? But you said no. He said they couldn't handle it and would leave us. I listened to you, and this is where we are now. You've become quite easy to get to, Deb. It didn't take you long, he said angrily, and after me you started sleeping with others. So don't act like a saint. I remember our first kiss last year at Christmas. You let me kiss you for a few minutes while Jen was in the bathroom and Carson went out to the car. It took you less than a week to end up in bed. I remembered that evening. Everything seemed so perfect, celebrating with our best friends, and while his wife and I were out of sight, he and my wife were kissing. I hate you, she answered him. It's mutual, bitch, he retorted. Jen and I watched them fume at each other for several minutes, feeling contempt and bewilderment towards them. Is there any hope after this? It looked hopeless. Too many lies, too much betrayal. If we had children or were older, perhaps I would have been weak and decided to try to make things right. But I was young, and there were no children to bind us together. I wanted to get a divorce. The doorbell rang. This time Jen went to open it. She returned with a woman holding 2 envelopes and a smartphone. Deborah Madison Kane, she asked my wife, who nodded. You have been served with subpoenas. She handed her the envelope and took a photo of her holding it. Trevor Gunderson, she asked Trev, who nodded reluctantly. You have been served with subpoenas. Debbie was now openly sobbing, holding the papers in her hands. Jen turned to me and shrugged. Then she approached her husband. We're done with you. Go home, pack your things, and get out. I don't ever want to see you again. Understood? Debbie didn't move. Then she turned to me and did something I didn't expect. She knelt down and crawled towards me and Jen. I beg you both. Please forgive me and give me another chance. I know I ruined everything. It was my fault. Do whatever you want with me. Just don't throw me out on the street, Carson. Please. Jen, talk to him. I beg you both. Debbie looked into my eyes, pleading. I realized at that moment that this was a test for me as a man. Yes, I still loved her. Despite the betrayal, I still loved her. But still, what she did was unforgivable, and yet it seemed to me that it was wrong to throw her away like that. But I couldn't trust her again. Jen is moving here and will live in my bedroom, I told her, looking into her eyes. I saw her flinch. I understand, she answered with a choked sob. I deserve it. I need to discuss this with her. Understand? The door closed behind Trevor and Jen returned. What are you going to do with her? She asked. You understand that she can't be trusted, right? I know, I answered, and I'm not going to. Debbie looked at us both in despair. Please, was all she said. Shut up, Jen replied and pushed her back to the floor. Debbie lay there for a second or two, then rose to her knees again. Carson, please, don't divorce me. Debbie, that ship has already left, I said, looking at her. We're getting divorced. But there will be a legal separation for 3 months. You have just enough time to convince me that you are worth saving. During this time, I will be living with Jen. She will be in my bedroom, the one that was yours. Understood? What do you want me to do, Carson? She asked humbly. Well, first of all, you have to beg Jen to give you a chance. If she doesn't agree, you will leave and be free. Debbie nodded and went to stand up. On your knees, Deb, I said. Go to her on your knees. Beg her to give you a chance to atone for having her husband. Go. I watched as she crawled on her knees towards Jen, who stood in her magnificent form. Slender, long-legged, with brown hair and high breasts. I enjoyed it so much the last 2 nights and planned to do it again. Jen, I'm so sorry, she said. Nonsense, Debbie, Jen replied. You're just sorry you got caught. I know that's what it looks like, Jen, but... No buts, Jen interrupted her sharply. You betrayed my trust just as much as you betrayed your husband. You two deserve each other. If it were my decision, I would throw you out of here. But this is not my home, and soon this will not be your home. I would suggest you find a cheap motel for the night, for the weekend, and then look for an apartment to move into. You need time to think about what you did. Debbie turned to me as if expecting me to save her. But I just looked at her, not retreating an inch. "Get some things and go, Debbie," I said. "Take your things for a week, and we will discuss how you will pick up the rest as needed." There was a look of detachment and sad acceptance on her face as she nodded and sobbed again. But she slowly got up and went into the bedroom to collect her things. 40 minutes later, she had 2 suitcases, a travel bag, a laptop bag, and a wallet packed. Jen and I watched as she loaded everything into her car, standing next to each other until she stopped for the last time. She extended her hand towards me, but I pulled away. She sobbed again and drove away, crying. "It went better than we thought," Jen said, leaning against me. "They brought this on themselves," I added, watching my soon-to-be ex-wife's car disappear into the distance. "Each spouse has the opportunity to change, but not everyone uses it." "Funny," she said, walking back in with me. "What's so funny?" I asked Jen as she started to take off her clothes. "Some people think they have an open marriage, but they forget to tell their spouse about this." 5 minutes later, Jen was sitting on the edge of the couch, legs spread, waiting for me. "Do you want an open relationship?" she asked when I pulled away. "Too much like dating others," I replied. "Do you need this?" "I just need different sex sometimes, Carson. I haven't tried variety for a long time." "Then I might need another one from time to time," I replied. "It's agreed," she said, breathless. "Now take me." 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. Both Jen and I got the 70% we were hoping for. Jen sold her house, and I took out a loan to pay Debbie 30% of the value of our house. In one day in court, we settled all financial and legal issues. But not Debbie's pain and guilt. She lost everything except her job. In the end, her parents found out about everything. Since she herself prepared them in case, I sent them videos and photos out of revenge. I never did. Trevor simply disappeared after his divorce from Jen was finalized. She had enough money to buy him back, but the last thing he told her was that he would contact her. 2 years passed, and we did not hear anything from him. Debbie still works and travels for business. What she does now, I don't care. Jen and I were at a coffee shop recently, and she walked by, intently on her phone. Jen and I live together, but we're both cautious about deep commitments. It's been a year since my divorce, and the memories of my time with Debbie are starting to fade. Jen and I were discussing traveling around the world, or at least they planned it. The damn virus from Wuhan in China ruined our plans to see distant countries. So we are both temporarily suspended from work and doing nothing but running, walking, and having sex like rabbits. I like her more and more, but I'm still wary, and she does too. Who wouldn't be after what we've been through? The other day, I received a letter from Debbie. "Hello, Carson. Hope you are fine. I'm trying to cope with my new life, but honestly, it's hard. I miss our days together. I miss you and us. I've had a lot of time to think about what I've done to you, to myself, and to us. I ruined everything by thinking I was entitled to whatever I wanted, no matter what it was. In my quest for sexual experimentation, pleasure, and satisfaction, I hurt the man I loved and lost my marriage. Not to mention that she helped destroy Jenny and Trevor's marriage. It would be so easy to blame him for what happened, but we all know that's not true. Everything I did of my own free will. Nobody forced me. I owe you an apology, Carson, not only for destroying our marriage and life together, but also, as you said, for losing respect for you. But before that happened, I lost self-respect. I believed that I deserved to have fun and that I should experience everything that I had missed. Well, here's an experience I had that I didn't expect. Divorce. There is nothing pleasant or satisfying about it. He tore me apart. I heard that you and Jen are still together. I wish you both happiness. But to say that I'm not jealous would be a lie. Take care of yourself and Jen. With regret, your ex-wife. With love, Debbie. Loneliness and isolation is terrible. What happens when people are away means a lot. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.